In my last video, I talked about how I ground reason and logic without believing in God. This video is a continuation of that topic, but here I want to focus on one specific objection often raised by presuppositional Christian apologists. The objection goes something like this: if I do not believe in God, and if I do not presuppose that the universe has an intelligent creator and sustainer, then I cannot account for the orderliness and consistency of the universe. And if I cannot account for that orderliness, then I cannot fully justify reason, science, or rational inquiry. After all, how do I know that the laws of logic, the laws of physics, or the regular patterns of nature will still hold tomorrow, or even in the next moment? Some apologists present this through an analogy called the toothpaste argument. I will explain that argument in a moment and why it is an epic fail. But before we get there, let me just say up front that I treat the orderliness of the universe as a brute fact. That is just the way reality is. Now, of course, there may be deeper explanations behind it. Maybe one day we will discover more about why reality has the structure it has, and people are free to offer hypotheses that make sense to them. But at the end of the day, any ultimate explanation for why the universe is orderly is going to be extremely difficult, if not impossible, to verify. Hello, my friend, this is Shen from Mindful Living. On this channel, we talk about reason and critical thinking. I used to be a Christian pastor, so I understand where religious people are coming from, because I've been there. I have since deconverted, and now I consider myself a soft atheist. If you are interested in conversations about religion, reason, and critical thinking, please hit subscribe. It is a small gesture, but it means a lot to me. And if you are interested in converting me back to believe in God, hit that subscribe button too, so you can be the first one to tell me why I'm wrong whenever a new video is released. Christians are free to believe in their deity, but they cannot simply say theism is better than atheism because theism can explain why the universe is orderly. Offering an explanation is not the same as offering the correct explanation. You can always invent a story that explains something. The question is whether that explanation is true, testable, necessary, and better than the alternatives. And this is where the Christian explanation becomes much less impressive. Whatever the real source or mechanism behind the orderliness of the universe may be, it does not change how we actually interact with the world. Christians and atheists approach the world in basically the same way. We observe patterns, we make predictions, we test those predictions, and when our predictions fail, we correct ourselves. Adding the hypothesis God exists does not give Christians a special advantage in understanding how the world functions. It does not make physics easier. It does not make chemistry more predictable. It does not tell us which scientific model is correct. It does not help us calculate tomorrow's weather, cure diseases, build airplanes, or explain why one theory works better than another. In practice, Christians rely on the same regularities of nature that everyone else relies on. Now, some Christians might object and say, but treating the orderliness of the universe as a brute fact is not an explanation. And maybe it is not. But that is not the problem they think it is. We are finite creatures with limited minds. Sooner or later, every worldview reaches a point where further explanation becomes unfeasible. Every worldview eventually has to stop somewhere. Christians may say God is the explanation for the orderliness of the universe. But that only pushes the question back one step. Why does God exist rather than no God? Why does God have the nature he has? Why should God's nature be treated as the final stopping point? At some point, Christians also have to appeal to a brute fact. They just locate the brute fact in God instead of in reality itself. But here's the important difference. When I treat the universe or the basic structure of reality as a brute fact, I am starting with something we know exists. We can observe the universe, we live in it, we interact with it, we study its patterns. But when Christians stop at God, they are stopping at something whose existence needs to be accepted by faith. My brute fact is at least a fact that we can all recognize, which is the universe. and it behaves in certain regular ways. But the Christian's brute fact depends on another claim first, that the Christian God exists. But that is not a shared starting point. It is not something everyone can observe, test, or reasonably agree on in the same way. It certainly has not been demonstrated beyond reasonable doubt. Saying God grounds the orderliness of the universe may sound profound, but it does not actually explain very much. It just replaces one brute fact with another less obvious one. Along this line, there is another argument I have heard from Christians. They sometimes call it the problem of induction, but I think this is a distorted version of David Hume's point. The claim is that if we do not believe in God, we have no reason to think the laws of physics will remain stable. In other words, they claim that atheists have no reason to believe that the universe will keep being orderly and predictable in the future. We have seen the sun rise in the past, but that does not deductively prove that the sun will rise tomorrow. From there, some apologists jump to the conclusion that atheists have no justification for expecting the sun to rise tomorrow or for trusting any regular pattern in nature. To be blunt, this is a very bad objection. I'm tempted to say it is stupid, and after my explanation, I think you will see why. First, when David Hume formulated the problem of induction, he was not saying we have no justification to predict anything. He noted that it would be impossible to live as if we didn't trust induction. He was pointing out that induction is different from deduction. In a valid deductive argument, if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. But induction does not work that way. Induction moves from past experience to future expectation, and that move does not give us certainty. That means we should not be shocked when something different from our past experience happens. The fact that the sun has risen every day in our experience does not logically prove, with deductive certainty, that it must rise tomorrow. But that does not mean we cannot make tentative predictions based on our limited knowledge and experience. It does not mean we should stop expecting patterns. It does not mean science collapses. It only means induction does not give us the same kind of certainty that deduction gives us. Presuppositional apologists often talk as if Hume's problem means atheists cannot have confidence in predicting anything or engaging in any reasoning unless they believe in God. But that is not what the problem of induction shows. The problem of induction is about ultimate philosophical justification. It is not a demonstration that ordinary prediction becomes impossible without a belief in God. I have heard some presuppositional apologists use an argument called the toothpaste argument. It is often associated with Greg Bahnsen. The argument goes something like this. Every day, we brush our teeth by squeezing toothpaste out of a tube and putting it on our toothbrush. We expect that if there is still toothpaste in the tube today, we will be able to squeeze out more toothpaste tomorrow. But according to this argument, if there is no God, we have no basis for that expectation. Why? Because without God, the laws of nature might suddenly change overnight. The toothpaste might not behave the same way tomorrow. The world might stop being regular and predictable. But this argument makes no sense. We expect to squeeze out toothpaste tomorrow because we can see that the tube is not empty yet. And based on our experience, when a toothpaste tube still has toothpaste inside, squeezing it usually pushes more toothpaste out. Yes, that is induction. And yes, I could be wrong. For example, if you have kids, you know exactly how I could be wrong. Maybe my child gets mischievous and squeezes out all the toothpaste when I'm not looking. Then tomorrow morning, I will try to brush my teeth and nothing will come out of the tube. But so what? That would not mean reason has collapsed. It would not mean science has failed. It would not mean I had no justification for expecting toothpaste to come out. It would simply mean my prediction was wrong because something changed that I did not know about. That is ordinary life. I expect my car to start when I leave the house. Most days it does. But if one morning my car does not start, I would be surprised, and then I would adjust. Maybe the battery is dead. Maybe the starter has a problem. Maybe I left the lights on. I would simply update my understanding based on new information. And that is what everyone does, including Christians. We make predictions with different degrees of confidence. Some expectations are very strong, some are weaker. Some are practical assumptions we rely on because they have worked repeatedly in the past. But ideally, we still leave room for the possibility that we could be wrong. It's not all or nothing. Saying I could be wrong does not mean I should act as if I cannot predict anything at all. That would assume I am incapable of learning from patterns, experience, and repeated observation. And that would be absurd. The fact that I cannot predict the future with absolute certainty does not mean I cannot make reasonable predictions. It only means my predictions are fallible, and when they fail, I adjust. That is in fact how reason works. Second, even if you believe in God, that alone is not the reason you expect the sun to rise tomorrow or the toothpaste tube to keep working the same way. Because the moment you say God, we still have to ask, what kind of God? For all you know, this God could be a God of chaos. Maybe he changes the laws of physics every morning just for fun. Maybe gravity works today but not tomorrow. Maybe the sun rises on Monday, disappears on Tuesday, turns green on Wednesday, and explodes on Thursday. You cannot simply say, I believe in God, therefore I can trust that the world is stable. That does not follow. You need some reason to believe this God is a God of order rather than a God of chaos. And where does that belief actually come from? I would argue it comes from your experience of the world. Imagine if your experience were completely different. Imagine if the law of physics changed without warning. Gravity randomly shifted. The sun became bright and dark unpredictably. Food on your plate suddenly disappeared. Objects floated, vanished, and reappeared for no consistent reason. Then suppose you open the Bible and read that God made the world stable and orderly. Would you believe it? I wouldn't, because that claim would contradict my entire experience of reality. This shows the real reason you believe the world is stable. It is not simply because the Bible says it. It is because that is what you experience. The Bible confirms a conclusion you already reached before you open its pages. I do not think this is controversial. If you tell me that the only reason you believe the world is stable and the laws of physics are consistent is because you read it in the Bible, and before reading the Bible, you genuinely thought the world was chaotic and unpredictable, I would simply say, I do not believe you. You expected the sun to rise before you studied theology. You trusted gravity before you had the doctrine of creation. You learned stability from reality first. Your theology came later. We all make predictions based on past experience. The idea that we should not use past experience to form future expectations is absurd. We have reason to think the past can inform the future because this process has already worked again and again. When you were 5 years old, you had already experienced the sun rising many times, so you expected it to rise the next day. Then the next day came and the sun rose again. That new experience became part of your past. The pattern continued. Day after day, what used to be a future expectation became another confirmed past experience. Each time the sun rose, your expectation became stronger. So given that every future day you have lived through eventually became a past day in which the sun did rise, and given that you have never experienced the sun failing to rise, why shouldn't you expect the pattern to continue tomorrow? Of course, this is still induction. It does not give absolute certainty, but it gives a perfectly reasonable expectation. I know I am stating the obvious. Honestly, if not for presuppositional apologists, I would never have predicted that I would one day make a video explaining why it is reasonable to expect the sun to rise tomorrow or that I can squeeze out toothpaste from the toothpaste tube. And I find it ironic that Christians would insist that atheists have no reason to believe that the universe is stable because they are supposed to be the ones who shouldn't expect the world to be the same tomorrow. But more on that later. Now, some Christians may still insist. Fine, we learn through experience and the world is stable and we are justified to make predictions. But still, the only reason the universe has order, stability, and regularity in the first place is because an orderly God made it and sustained it that way. My response is simple. How do you know that? How do you know there must be metaphysical laws existing in God's mind that the universe has to obey? How do you know matter would fall apart unless God constantly holds it together? Why can't gravity, the strong nuclear force, the weak nuclear force, and other features of reality be intrinsic to the physical world? I'm not saying Christians must stop believing that God sustains the universe. They can believe that if they want to, but I do not see a compelling argument showing that this must be true before we can trust reason, logic, or the stability of reality. Some Christians may respond, but if the laws of physics and logic are not metaphysically real, then they are just human conventions. And if they are just human conventions, then they are not universal. But I think that creates a false dilemma. The laws of physics and logic do not have to be floating in God's mind in order to be more than human convention. They can describe stable features, patterns, and relationships within reality itself. When we say a law applies universally, we are not saying that because we first look into God's mind. We are saying that because, as far as we can tell, reality behaves that way without exception. We construct the laws of physics by studying reality, not by reading God's mind, because we do not have access to God's mind. Atheists don't have access to God's mind, neither do Christians. Christians recognize the regularities of nature in the same basic way atheists do, through experience, observation, testing, and correction. For example, we do not learn facts about the flu by examining God's mind. We learn those facts through empirical observation, medical knowledge, and experience. We do not say there is uniformity in the universe, therefore everyone recovers from the flu, because we know that it's not true. In rare cases, people die from the flu, so we do not speak in absolute terms. But we do say that human beings need oxygen to live because everything we know from experience, biology, and medicine confirms that oxygen is necessary for human life. We do not need to read God's mind to make that judgment. We observe reality, test it, and see whether or where exceptions appear. That is how we distinguish between patterns that are generally reliable but allow for exceptions, and principles that appear to apply without exception. Some things have exceptions, some things do not seem to have exceptions, and our judgment about that comes from experience, investigation, and interaction with reality. It does not depend on whether we first believe God exists. Just because you believe in God, it does not mean you can expect toothpaste to come out from the same tube every single day. You still expect it to run out at some point. Believing in God does not magically give you certainty about what will happen tomorrow. You still rely on experience. You still judge each situation by the relevant facts. You still know that some patterns continue, some patterns change, and some expectations fail. So if Christians still want to say, God holds everything together, including the laws of physics and logic, that is fine with me. I cannot disprove that in some absolute sense. There is no experiment we can perform to show that atoms behave consistently only because they are tracking an unchanging cosmic rule book in God's mind. Maybe that is true, maybe that is not. I do not see how we could confirm it. But please do not pretend that atheists have no ground for believing in the uniformity and regularity of the universe unless they first assume God. That is the part I reject. I'm not saying a transcendent God who sustains the universe must be false. I'm saying that even if such a God exists, we do not learn stability, reason, logic, or the laws of nature by directly accessing God's mind. We learn them through our experience of reality. Frankly, I suspect that when Christians say the world can only be stable because it follows the laws of physics that God set up, they are mixing up descriptive laws and prescriptive laws. I've heard many Christians say a law requires a lawgiver. That sounds intuitive at first. We live in countries where laws are passed by governments. Those laws come from thinking minds. They tell people what they should or should not do. So it is easy to make the jump and say, if human laws require lawmakers, then the laws of physics must also require a cosmic lawgiver. But I think that argument confuses two very different things. The laws of a country are prescriptive. They tell people what they are supposed to do. The rules of chess are also prescriptive. They define what moves are allowed and what moves are not allowed. But the laws of physics are not like that. The laws of physics are descriptive. They do not tell nature what it should do. They describe the regular patterns we observe in nature. We call them laws, not because we have discovered a rule book written in the sky, but because nature behaves with enough regularity that we can describe those patterns in formulas, models, and concise statements. The same point applies to logic. The laws of logic are not commands that reality obeys in the same way citizens consciously obey traffic laws. They are formal descriptions of identity, distinction, consistency, and implication. They help us describe what can be meaningfully said about reality and what follows from that. A helpful analogy is the relationship between a map and the terrain. A map is not the terrain itself. A map is a model of the terrain. It describes the mountains, rivers, roads, and coastlines. The terrain determines the map. The map does not determine the terrain. If someone looked at the mountain range and said, "Wow, that mountain formed itself by tracking the map in my hand," we would immediately see the problem. That gets the relationship backward. The map is made to fit the terrain. The terrain is not made to fit the map. In the same way, the laws of physics, as we understand them, are models of how reality behaves. They are our descriptions of the terrain. They are not necessarily commands imposed on reality from the outside. This is where I think many Christian apologists make a mistake. They say a law requires a lawgiver, but that only works if the laws of nature and logic are prescriptive laws, like government laws or chess rules. But that is precisely what has not been shown. Atoms do not obey the law of gravity the way a driver obeys a speed limit. Matter is not looking at a cosmic rulebook and deciding to follow instructions. Gravity is our description of how matter behaves under certain conditions. So when we talk about laws of nature, we are not talking about prescriptions. We are talking about descriptions. Now, a Christian can still believe that God created the terrain. They can believe God created reality with stable patterns. That is fine, but they cannot simply move from "there are laws of nature" to "therefore there must be a lawgiver," because that argument depends on treating descriptive laws as if they were prescriptive laws. And once we understand that distinction, the argument loses much of its force. Some Christians might say, that's fine, we developed the laws of physics to describe what we see happening in the world, but why is the world consistent and stable in the first place? Why is the universe not chaotic? Without a prescriptive rule system, why does nature behave in a consistent and predictable way? My response is this: why should we assume that chaos is the default? Why begin with the assumption that reality would fall apart unless a supernatural mind holds it together? Why not consider the simpler possibility that stability, order, and regularity are features of reality itself? And there's something ironic here. In ancient times, it was often the unpredictability of nature that led people to imagine deities behind natural events. Thunderstorms, floods, droughts, earthquakes, eclipses, diseases, and famine were often interpreted as acts of gods or spirits. People did not say, nature is chaotic and unpredictable, therefore there must be no God. They often said the opposite. Nature is chaotic and unpredictable, therefore some divine power must be behind it. And we still see that today. When something unusual happens, or when scientists do not yet have a full explanation, many Christians are quick to say, God did it. In those cases, irregularity is treated as evidence for God. But then when nature behaves in a stable and predictable way, they also say God must be behind that too. At that point, both regularity and irregularity are being used to point to the same conclusion. If nature is orderly, God did it. If nature is strange, God did it. If the universe is predictable, God is sustaining it. If something seems to break the normal pattern, God is intervening. That starts to look like a heads I win, tails you lose argument. No matter what nature does, the conclusion is already fixed. If nature's regularity points to God, and nature's irregularity also points to God, then what exactly would count against that claim? That is the problem. The argument becomes unfalsifiable. It is not really explaining anything. It is just placing God behind every possible outcome. There's another irony too. In practice, it is often secular scientists who most consistently expect nature to behave predictably, precisely because they are not building supernatural interruptions into their models. We call that methodological naturalism. Christians, on the other hand, often say science is possible only because God made the universe orderly. But at the same time, many also believe God can disrupt natural processes whenever he wants. And this becomes especially ironic when we look at many presuppositional apologists, because most of the ones I know of are proud young earth creationists, such as J. Dyer and Jim Bob. They claim that Christianity provides the foundation for science, but then they reject mainstream science whenever it conflicts with their interpretation of Genesis. Many of them believe fossils and geological layers were largely formed by a global flood. They believe the earth looks old, but is actually young. Some even argue that when God created the stars, he also created the light already on its way to Earth, making the stars look millions or billions of light years away. But if that is true, then the world is misleading. The evidence would no longer reliably tell us what happened in the past. The universe could appear one way while the real history is completely different. That would not make science more secure. It would make science less secure. They say atheists cannot do science without God because atheists cannot account for the stability of nature. But their own view often requires major supernatural disruptions of nature, a created appearance of age, and an expectation of future return of Christ, where the normal order of the world will be dramatically interrupted, talking about the stability of the world. And yet they do not seem to see the irony. So the problem is not that atheists cannot trust the regularity of nature without God. The problem is that some Christians want to use regularity to prove God, irregularity to prove God, science to prove God, and rejection of science to defend God. At that point, the argument is not about following the evidence. It is about making sure the conclusion is protected, no matter what the evidence says. Lastly, I want to address one more talking point that sometimes comes up. Some Christians may ask, how can you trust your experience? How do you know you are not just a brain in a vat? But this question applies to theists too. How do they know they are not brains in vats? Because they believe in God? But believing something is true does not make it true. How do they know their belief in God was not programmed by alien scientists who injected a chemical into the vat to produce religious experiences in their brains? How do they know their memory of reading the Bible was not also part of the simulation? Once we enter that kind of radical skepticism, everyone is in the same boat. None of us can prove with absolute certainty that we are not brains in vats, dreaming, hallucinating, or living in some artificial simulation. But here's the practical point. Whether we believe in God or not, we still live as if this world is real. And even if we were brains in vats, our experiences would still be stable enough for us to navigate this simulated world. If gravity appears to work every day in this experience, I still have to take gravity seriously within this experience. It is not like I would say, well, maybe I'm a brain in a vat, so I am going to jump off a roof and see if I can fly. That would be ridiculous. Even in a simulated world, we would still need to learn the rules of that world. We would still need to recognize patterns, make predictions, avoid danger, communicate with others, and correct our mistakes. So the brain in a vat objection does not give the Christian any special advantage. It does not show that atheists cannot trust reason, but they can. It only shows that absolute certainty is hard to get. But that is true for everyone. Ultimately, what justifies our use of reason, logic, and mathematics is that they work in our experience. Take a simple example, 2 plus 2 equals 4. This works because when you put 2 apples on the table and then put another 2 apples on the table, you get 4 apples. You can repeat this as many times as you want under normal conditions, and the result will be the same. Because that pattern is stable, we can formalize it in mathematical language. Of course, mathematics becomes much more abstract than counting apples. We have concepts like negative numbers, irrational numbers, imaginary numbers, infinity, calculus, and higher dimensional geometry. Some of these do not correspond to ordinary physical objects in a simple one-to-one way, but the fact that some parts of mathematics are abstract does not mean mathematics is detached from reality or useless. It means human beings can build formal systems that go beyond immediate sensory experience, and those systems can still help us model, understand, and predict reality. Reason, logic, and mathematics do not need to exist as objects in some separate metaphysical realm before we can use them with confidence. They are justified because they help us navigate the world, detect errors, make predictions, build technology, communicate clearly, and correct ourselves when we are wrong. And Christians rely on them in exactly the same practical way. In closing, when presuppositional apologists claim that atheists have no justification for trusting that the world is stable without God, I honestly have no idea what that is based on. It cannot be that their own confidence in the stability of the world comes exclusively from their belief that God exists. That is not how anyone actually lives. Christians do not expect the sun to rise tomorrow only because they first work out a doctrine of creation. They do not expect gravity to keep working because they first solved a theological argument. They do not expect toothpaste to come out of the tube because they first proved that God sustains the laws of nature. They expect those things for the same basic reason everyone else does, because that is how the world has consistently behaved in their experience. They treat the world as stable because they live in a world that appears stable. They observe patterns. They rely on those patterns. They adjust when expectations fail. That is not an atheist method. That is just how human beings navigate reality. So if Christians can trust the stability of the world based on experience, observation, and repeated interaction with reality, then why can't atheists do the same? I do not see how Christians can deny that experience plays a major role in their own expectation that the world will continue to behave in regular ways. So, when Christian apologists say, without God, you cannot expect toothpaste to come out of the tube tomorrow, they are not exposing a problem in atheism. They are exposing how far an argument can drift from ordinary common sense when it is designed to win a debate instead of describe how human reasoning actually works. Christian apologists need to abandon these toothpaste arguments and related rhetoric if they want to be taken more seriously by non-believers. If you found this video helpful, please like and subscribe. And since you just survived a whole video about reason, logic, induction, and brains in vat, pressing a couple of buttons should be easy, right? Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.